Morning, everybody. Welcome to today's session where we're going to be talking about some consumer trends and specifically how this is impacting on health and well-being. But before we start, let me introduce myself. I'm Heidi and I'm a Senior Research Manager at Insights Consulting. I've been around for about 10 years at Insights, and I really have the privilege of working together with an awesome team of researchers to empower brand builders just like yourselves to shape a sustainable future for brands. I've also worked on brands like RSEQ, Combank, Pfizer, so really enjoy getting involved in that space.
And I'm Matt Jorgensen. I'm one of the business directors here at Insights Consulting based in Sydney. And just like Heidi, I really love engaging with a range of different clients and helping them to bring the voice of their consumer to the stakeholders of their organization. And recently I've been working very closely on some very interesting business challenges for brands like Combank and Mondelez.
So we're also very lucky to be joined by two awesome guest speakers a little bit later in the session. We have got Bram Ferret, who's the Business Intelligence Lead for Sanofi Consumer Healthcare in Australia and New Zealand. Welcome, Bram, and thank you for joining us. And we also have Claire Edgerton, who's Patient and Healthcare Experience Lead at Pfizer. So we'll be hearing it from them and their opinions on how this is affecting companies and brands a little later. So some of you may have actually attended our earlier session in the year where we presented the trends at a broader level looking across industries. So today we're going to be focusing very specifically on the implications for health and well-being specifically. So some of this upfront context that I'm going to give you might be a little bit of a repeat. So bear with me just for 5 minutes whilst I recap a bit on how we uncovered these trends for 22. So the theme for the 2022 trends in this report is called Rebound and Rebalance. So as we know, with this sort of enduring pandemic reality, we all thought the pandemic, we were going to reach a new normal. We all know that didn't happen. We had natural disasters, hyperinflation, war in Europe now, and we're really just starting to become accustomed to this ongoing uncertainty. And what we're trying to do in this uncertainty is reclaim our lives. Now we have a federal election for good measure, and we've really got a strong mix of change and evolution happening across our lives. So what people are trying to do is trying to find balance between the short term and the long term. So things like living in the moment and focusing on the now and really embracing those small moments of joy, but at the same time also trying to plan for the future as a way to find stability and purpose in our lives. So there's really this duality where we're trying to balance that purpose and that pleasure in which we strive to seek happiness. So the starting point of our trends work was to do a qualitative exploration where we worked with an Illume network. And these are really a network across the globe of leading edge consumers who are really in tune with cultural nuances, quite switched on, and that enabled us to identify 10 consumer trends for 22. And over the slide, you can see them all. The real challenge is really, as market researchers, it's about understanding the extent to which these manifest, also how this is happening. And so what we did as a follow-up stage to this is we partnered with Data and we quantified these trends with over 15,000 consumers in 17 markets, and we did 1,000 in Australia. So the final stage of quantification essentially allows us to score the trends for each market or region. And what it allows us then to do is to map these trends on 2 parameters. And the first parameter is on attitude. So this reflects the extent that people actually identify with the trend attitudinally. And the second one is behavior, and that reflects the extent to which people actually act upon it. And what we're then able to do is understand the trends across and map them across 4 quadrants. And this tells us really where each trend is in its life cycle. So we've got trends that are more nascent, which really represent the more leading edge kind of emerging ways of thinking, but then those also that manifest as expanding trends, which are more mainstream in society. So today what we'll do is we obviously don't have time to go through all of the trends in the market, but what we have identified for today as the most interesting for health and well-being are the nascent trends around sensory stimulation, redefining normal, as well as the more expanding trend, which is uncompromised values, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail today. So before I hand over to Matt to talk to you about the different trends, we'd like to just contextualize today's conversation and frame it in the understanding of what health and well-being means. We all obviously have extremely personal understanding of what health and well-being means to each of us as individuals. And when it comes to health and well-being, for brands and companies, we're seeing that it's really becoming about putting this at the heart of people's quality of life and in how we work and define the sector. So we're working with amazing brands and organizations across the health and wellbeing landscape. And the $1 million question really for all of us working with insights is how do brands and organizations actually respond to this? So for us, health and wellbeing covers a spectrum of pillars, which range from consumer healthcare all the way through to fitness, nutrition, appearance, sleep, and mindfulness as well. But it also expands into categories like FMCG as well. So what I'll do now, just having given you that bit of context, is I'll hand over to Matt, who'll talk to you a little bit more about the trend around sensory stimulation and give you a little bit of insight and some examples around that trend specifically. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Heidi. So as Heidi said, our first trend that we're going to talk to today is called sensory stimulation. And this trend is really built around this idea of connection and engagement. And it's underpinned by our innate human desire for engagement and positive emotions. And as you can imagine, following 2 years of some very long lockdowns and lots of COVID restrictions, consumers are quite primed for some stimulation and engagement. And so we've seen quite a major swing in a number of sectors, and health and well-being is no exception in terms of the role that technology is playing throughout the COVID era. And so that means that things were strictly once in the realm of in-person interaction and now really stretching across digital boundaries. So this is presenting some interesting opportunities for brands to be able to leverage moving forward. So in terms of where Australia is falling out on this trend, you can see that we're very firmly sitting in the nascent space in that lower left quadrant, basically telling us that this trend is not as prevalent yet in Australia as it is in some other markets. And you can also notice on this map, there's quite a clear east-west divide emerging where we see a lot of Southeast Asian markets sitting more in the expanding space and a lot of Western markets sitting in that more nascent space. If we look at the hard numbers, we can see that Australia is sitting at 10 percentage points behind the global average on this trend. So 56% in Australia for our trend score versus a global of 66. And we do know that traditionally Australia has been a bit of a follower when it comes to technology, fueled by a number of things, not limited to, but also including our geographic isolation. And we also see across many sectors, Southeast Asian markets tend to be more of a leader in this space. What we also see is that this is a space where our next gen or our Gen Z and Gen Y groups are leading in both in Australia and across the globe. So you can see there that the results for the next gen consumers sitting ahead of the global average and also ahead of the Australian average, telling us that this is a trend that is being driven more so by younger consumers. So in the health and well-being space, this is where we're seeing digital technology continue to evolve, and it's really changing healthcare experiences and consumer expectations when it comes to customer experience within health and well-being, but also setting benchmarks for customer experience across other sectors as well. So we're seeing this play out in a number of ways, such as technology stepping in to change the way that consumers and patients manage conditions and their overall well-being. And it allows them to have control or a level of control that they've never had before, and also to raise the bar in terms of the expectation of personalized services and approaches. And so the focus for brands here is really being able to respond to this demand and using the access to consumer data and technology to deliver to those personalized, convenient, and seamless experiences that consumers are expecting. So some examples of where some brands are tapping into this trend and really leveraging on it. A brand from the US called Vitamin Labs are using DNA and blood sample profiling to create personalized vitamin supplement programs based on your specific physiological needs. Another group, His and Hers, have engaged with multi-specialist telehealth platforms that connect consumers with experts, can provide advice on a number of health and wellbeing challenges, and switching the conversation away from just focusing on a specific condition to actually speaking about the whole person as a whole, and not just the specific condition or challenge that they're facing at that time. And then we see brands like Supernatural who are really changing the nature of the fitness industry through the use of VR programs that are challenging or changing the way consumers engage with the gym through tailor-made programs set in VR environments based on your specific fitness levels and your specific goals. So we're seeing that there's an opportunity for health and wellbeing brands across a range of different spaces to actually think about how that we can potentially up the game in terms of that hyper-personalization. And we're seeing that that rapid uptake of technology across different aspects of our lives means that the expectations in health and wellbeing are really no different. So the opportunity here for brands is to think about the opportunity to connect with the consumer data they have in place, to look at thinking about how can solutions be personalized in new and different ways that potentially stretch beyond the traditional bounds of health and wellbeing, and also to reframe the conversation away from looking at an individual condition or problem, but look at the person as a whole and their overall well-being. Our second trend is entitled Redefining Normal. And this is a trend that's underpinned by our drive for relationships and meaning, and therefore as a strong inherent link to our overall health and well-being space. As we deepen our understanding and conversations around social justice, we're often questioning things that society has presented us to always be as what we would typically see as normal. And we're asking ourselves, well, what does normal actually mean today? Increasingly, we're seeing consumers are turning towards brands and products that are representing their true realities and their lived experiences. They're looking at brands and products that allow them to be their true selves. And they're looking for organizations that recognize that the reality and the experience of every consumer is actually different and personal. So this idea of normal perhaps is something that doesn't really exist anymore at all. So in Australia, you'll see here that we're actually on the edge of moving into an expanding trend on this space. And you probably may have noticed that in terms of the types of conversations we've been having in Australia over the last few years. So we've seen a major shift in the conversation around things such as mental well-being, anxiety, as well as the focus on stretching diversity and inclusion to new areas. When we look at the results in terms of our trend scores in Australia, we can see that our next-gen consumers and mass consumers are relatively closely aligned in Australia. So our trend score in Australia of 68 and our trend score for our next-gen consumers of 64. However, in other parts of the world, this is still a space that is being very firmly driven more so by Gen Z and Gen Y, our next-gen consumers, where we see a more substantial gap being led more so by next-gen consumers. So today we're hearing conversations on topics such as neurodiversity, gender identity. They're becoming much more commonplace. And this concept of what normal is has become a really fluid space that is pushed beyond the traditional confines of time gone by. So in this next example I'm going to show you, which is a TVC from the UK, really shows how this is turning up in day-to-day communications. And it's really aiming to challenge some preconceived ideas of what normal actually means and looks like.
Perfect. Come on then, have a great day. Thanks for keeping an eye on it.
Off somewhere fun today? Are you all right?
What gift have you got, Sam? Is it a calculator?
Off somewhere fun today? Are you all right? Off somewhere fun today? You all right?
What gift did you get, Sam? Is it a calculator?
Sorry, did he scare you?
What gift did you get, Sam? Is it a calculator? What gift did you get? Is it a
Sorry.
calculator?
What are you doing? You're trying to kill yourself. Are you blind?
Have you seen this epic fail? What's that like? Have you seen this epic fail?
Somewhere fun today? Are you all right?
What are you doing? You're trying to kill yourself. Are you blind?
Sorry, did he scare you?
Is it a calculator?
Sorry, did he scare you?
I thought you were...
We're out of nuggets. Do you want to see the special?
Are you okay? How can I help?
I'm autistic, and sometimes I get too much information.
So clearly a very powerful example that brings to life the lived experience of people who are living with autism and shows that for everyone to understand what it's actually like. So we've seen many changes in what is normal, and that's extended across a range of sectors and expressions. So we have brands that are really looking to the normalization of mental health and well-being. And apps like Wave have built platforms that are really aiming to help adults with anxiety to improve their sleep patterns and quality of life. We've seen retailers such as Coles introducing quiet hour shopping to make for an easier shopping experience for people who are living with autism. We've also seen brands like Ryman in the aged care and retirement living space really challenge preconceived ideas and biases around who older Australians are and how they should be represented in communication. And recently, Bonds have taken a bold and very unashamed, loud and proud position on their recent campaign, challenging the conventions that relate to underwear for women during their menstrual cycle. So we're very clearly at a point where brands across a range of sectors are seeing a normalization of topics and areas that were once seen to be quite niche or taboo. And when it relates to consumer health and well-being, there is no exception. So the opportunity for brands in this space is to really think about how your brand engages with and shows up for your consumer base. The idea that health and well-being is just linked to physical well-being has very quickly become an outdated perspective, with physical, mental, and emotional well-being all coming together in a view of holistic well-being. Brands need to acknowledge today that consumers lead very different and divergent paths, and they no longer fit into neat boxes, and that they're embracing brands that prioritize their well-being over a sense of normality or normalcy. They're looking to brands that enable and empower access for all, not just those who fit a normal stereotype that is quickly being seen to be outdated. And so for our last trend that we'll take you through today, we're talking through uncompromised values. And this really speaks to the movement we've seen from consumers who are looking for more and more to make choices to manage their health and well-being based on other considerations as well, including social responsibility, inclusiveness, or other personal values. And we did see this come to light in quite a significant way last year during the COVID-19 vaccine push, with many brands engaging in this space for the first time. So when we look at where Australia maps in this space, we're actually one of the leading Western markets in this territory, with many brands in Australia taking stand on corporate values where we often sometimes see government maybe actually lagging. And this is a space where we do see that Gen Z and Gen Y, our next gen consumers, are really leading the pack, both in Australia and globally. And more we see that they're turning to brands that reflect their values and what really matters to them. So as I said, in 2021, we saw a vast array of brands really stepping up to the discussion around vaccines. And this was coming from brands that typically would not have engaged in a health-related messaging in any other circumstance. So we saw brands such as major corporates, such as NAB, talking about this through their jab campaign, Qantas offering prizes, Qantas points rewards for people who submitted a vaccine certificate. And even smaller brands such as Hawke Brewery, a Sydney-based brewer, using communication to help encourage consumers to actually move out and to get their vaccines during last year's lockdowns. So it's been quite an interesting shift to see brands that typically wouldn't have normally had a role to play in a health-related message, stepping up to the plate to deliver that and support a broader benefit for their overall consumer base. And we've seen that blurring continue in terms of that, even though brands that may not typically see themselves as being a health-related brand, the lines between their role and their traditional space is actually starting to blur, with them stepping more directly into health and well-being. And this is even extended as well. Again, more recently, we've seen a number of brands stepping up in terms of taking their stance, with many companies exiting markets such as Russia and Belarus, no longer offering their services in these markets, and at the same time donating money and supplies to the people of Ukraine. So we're seeing that brands, generally speaking, are having a stronger role to play in our society than ever, and this is becoming more of a consumer expectation as time goes by. So the opportunity here for brands is to really ensure that we aren't afraid to take a stance on social issues that consumers rally around or engage with. And what's really important in this space is that we need to make sure that we engage with it in a meaningful way, but also in a way that demonstrates our willingness to act. Because we've seen that over time, consumers have become very eager to point out airbrushed attempts at authenticity. And we've seen that consumers can spot a fake a mile away. So the opportunity here is to engage in the issues that matter, but it's most important not just to make the promise, but actually then be demonstrating the authenticity to commit and deliver behind it as well. So we've just touched on 3 out of our 10 trends from today, and hopefully that's been enough just to inspire a little bit of curiosity for you. And of course, many of these things, they instill some interest, and they bring up lots of questions and kind of create an opportunity for us to stop and think. But we all as business people have challenges being posed to us by our stakeholders within our organizations. And our challenge is, how do we take some of this inspiration that we've shared and actually apply it to some of your day-to-day business experiences to drive commercial impact?
We basically, we're just a quick closing. Is what we're seeing coming through very clearly is that digital is really changing the way people are engaging with health and well-being. They're starting to change expectations in terms of taking more accountability for their own health, but also expecting and demanding more personalized and tailored experiences. So health and well-being is now more of a priority, but it's really about COVID and the pandemic and all the sort of upheaval we've had, redefining how we approach our health and taking much more of a focus on our mental and emotional well-being, and placing a demand on brands and companies to look at the whole being and not just the condition, but rather the person as a whole. And as Bram ended off so clearly, it's really about brands having that opportunity to really have purpose and to play a more active role in changing the shape of our future. So those are the kind of the main takeaways that we wanted to leave you with. But really important to note that even though digital is sort of at the forefront and it's becoming the new currency, people still value people. And it's that human backbone, and it's that compassion and that sense of community that still sits behind that digital experience. So that's really where we've landed today. So just hope that's given you some interesting food for thought. Please don't hesitate at all to reach out to either Matt or myself. Hope you all have a wonderful day and that you enjoyed the session.